Katie Aiken, politics reporter.
Paige Switzer, news director.
Rachel Stassenberger, politics editor.
Nick Coltrane, a politics reporter, and also the one assigned to covering Senator Sanders.
It's a familiar face there.
Well, Senator, you want to make sure that no one in America pays more than $200 for the medicine they need by capping what Americans pay for prescription drugs.
As part of Medicare for all.
Part of Medicare for all. You should say you'll do that by negotiating drug prices under Medicare and also indexing drug prices to other countries, but still that almost sounds too good to be true. How does the financing work?
First of all, we have to understand that right now as a nation, we are paying by far highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. And let me be clear, when I'm using my words advisedly, we are dealing not only with the greed of the pharmaceutical industry, which made $69 billion in profit last year, while 1 out of 5 Americans cannot afford to fill the prescriptions that doctors prescribe. We're dealing with corruption as well. We're dealing with price fixing. We're dealing with collusion. And I don't even have to go into the opioid epidemic as another example of what the pharmaceutical industry is doing. A couple of months ago, you may recall, I took folks from the Midwest, from Michigan, over the Canadian border. We purchased insulin for 1/10 the price in Canada in terms of what we're paying here in the United States. So what you got is an industry that has to be taken on. They have spent over the last 30 years $4 billion on lobbying and campaign contributions. So today, if you go into your pharmacy and the pharmacist tells you your price of your medicine is double or triple, nothing anybody can do about it. So we got to take them on, and what we do is 3 things. Number one, unlike what goes on in other countries, Medicare for All will negotiate prices with the pharmaceutical industry, not let them charge any price that they want. Number 2, we will do, as you indicate, an index with major countries around the world and say, why? If you're selling this drug in France and the UK for X dollars, why do you think you're going to sell it in the United States for 5 times more? Third, I believe in prescription drug reimportation, which means that pharmacists, the prescription drug distributors, should be able to buy FDA-approved medicine elsewhere and charge it at that price in the United States. And then by doing that, and also, terms of Medicare for all, putting public money into subsidizing prescription drugs, we can have a program which says nobody in America should pay more than $200 a year for the prescription drugs they need.
The drug makers argue that they need the kind of income they're getting for research into new drugs that may save more lives. I mean, what is your response?
They're lying.
They're lying.
Look, this is a corrupt industry, and I respect the researchers. And God knows that we need research into Alzheimer's and cancer and other serious illnesses, and we need to do that. But as you may or may not know, they spend far more money on advertising, promotion, executive salaries than they do, in fact, in research and development, even research and development. Sometimes you have what they call Me Too drugs. You change the color of the judge. You modify a little bit. That's a new drug, not really a new drug. We need breakthroughs in cancer. We need breakthroughs in Alzheimer's. We need breakthroughs in diabetes. Terrible illnesses ravaging the people of this country and around the world.
Talk specifically about insulin, because that's a drug that many of the forms have been around for a long time.
Right.
What would you do? You've got a few manufacturers of insulin. They may just say to you, we won't take it.
Yeah, well, they may say that to me, but they're not going to say that to my Attorney General. Because my Attorney General will charge them with antitrust violations. In terms of insulin, it turns out, I learned this when I went on that trip. This is unbelievable, but this is where we are as a nation. This is not only a dysfunctional healthcare system, but dealing with pharmaceuticals. There are some 7.5 million people, as I recall, who use insulin. About 25% of them are rationing insulin. Mm-hmm. All right, that's insane. And when you ration insulin, you get sicker, sometimes you die. So what we will do is, there has been a pattern, and you're right, 3 major companies, I think, produce about 90% of insulin in this country. And just coincidentally, no doubt, one raises their price, the other one raises their price. That's what I mean by price fixing, and that's what I mean by corruption.
But you can threaten them all you want. Would you support,
of course you're brave.
Would you support the government manufacturing insulin or
look,
something like that?
There's not a question of, when you're president, you don't threaten them. price fixing happens to be illegal. That is corruption.
But would you support the government getting in the business of manufacturing?
Well, what you would do is take away their intellectual property, their ownership of intellectual property if they continue to engage in illegal behavior. Right now, in terms of healthcare, it is insane, as I said earlier, that 1 out of 5 people who walk into a doctor's office and get a prescription cannot afford to fill that prescription. Some of them die, some of them are becoming sicker. And then when you look at the opioid epidemic, what the states' attorneys general are now doing all over this country are suing the major opioid manufacturers because they knowingly, underline knowingly, were selling a product that they knew was addictive, that was killing people, and their response was to hire more salespeople. That is the mentality of the industry.
As long as we're on healthcare, let's jump in. We editorialized recently on your VA, on your veteran.
I heard about that. You're wrong, I'm right.
But
Guess we're done here then,
Make
right?
that case to us of why we should have a parallel system with infrastructure. And I've talked to people now, you're siphoning workers off this idea that you want, where are those health workers going to come from? They're going to come out of the private sector. So talk about
Well, look, you got, I'm the former chair of the U.S. Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, and have had the honor and the privilege of working with the American Legion, the DAV, Vietnam vets, AMVETS, all of the VFW, all of the major veterans organizations. So I think for a start, and I remember this distinctly, as the chair, we had a hearing, and we lined up every one of the veterans organizations. And we said, you tell me, your membership, American Legion, VFW, DAV, whatever it may be, how do they feel about VA healthcare? And check the record. Great, good, very good, excellent. Do you want to see it privatized? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Are there problems within the VA? Absolutely there are. All right. And one of the concerns that I have is that Trump is trying to privatize the VA. And I think that that is a very bad idea. Look, here is the bottom line here is no matter what your view is on this or that war, and you're looking at somebody who led the opposition to the war in Iraq, Gulf War, is when people put their lives on the line, when men and women put their lives on the line to defend this country, they are entitled to receive the very best health care that this country can provide. And they are entitled also to understand that when you come back from war, and you walk into a private doctor's office, you're dealing with PTSD, or maybe you saw your buddy get blown up in front of you. Not everybody appreciates that experience. And I think one of the things, and talk to veterans about this, that they like about the VA is that many of the staff there are veterans themselves. They are familiar with veterans' issues. They know what veterans have gone through, and they're able to communicate better. There's nothing more frustrating, I think, to the veterans that I have talked to when they talk to a doctor who really doesn't know what combat is about. So, bottom line is, I do support what the major veterans organizations want. They want us not to privatize the VA. They want us to strengthen the VA, which now has tens of thousands of vacancies in terms of doctors and nurses and other staff.
So where are you going to get the 50,000 workers you want to add?
Well, we need, you're touching on one part of the healthcare crisis. It is not just the VA. Do we have enough doctors in America? No. Do we have enough doctors in rural America? Absolutely not. In urban America? No, we don't. What we need is a lot, and many of the doctors and dentists, by the way, are getting older. So we need to make sure that when I talk about Medicare for all and healthcare for all, it's not only guaranteeing healthcare as a human right. That doesn't do you any good if there's not a doctor in your community, if there's not a hospital in your community. So what we have got to do is significantly expand the number of doctors. And let me also tell you something. Doctors of color, African American doctors and nurses, Latino doctors and nurses. But we need to get doctors into the communities that where they are needed. And that touches, one of the things you learn when you run for president, you'll excuse me, I'm here to answer any question you have, but everything is related to everything else. That's what you learn.
So let's segue into immigration.
No, let's segue for 1 minute. I'm going to get to answer any question you have. But let me get to the issue of why I'm calling for public colleges and universities to be tuition-free and canceling all student debt. If you go to medical school and you come out $300,000-$400,000 in debt, and I'll never forget being in Des Moines talking to a young woman who graduated dental school, $400,000 in debt. What, you think you're going to practice in rural Iowa? I don't think so. You're going to go to some fancy place where you can make your money to pay off your student debt. So what we have got to do is expand the programs like National Health Service Corps, which say to you, if you want to practice in an underserved area, we're going to cancel all of your student debt. And then you can practice in underserved areas, all right? So, number one, I believe that healthcare is a human right. I think it is absurd that we are spending twice as much per person on healthcare as do the people of any other country, when 87 million of Americans are uninsured or underinsured, 30,000 die each year, and some 500,000 people go bankrupt because of medically related debts. That is an insane system. It is a dysfunctional system. We're going to move to Medicare for all.
Well, to segue, what I'm thinking of with immigration, though, is many of our doctors are here on visas. I mean, do we need, is that where we can find more health professionals?
Well, that's one area, but I think we educate young people. We say to the young people in this country, not just in healthcare, in climate change and other areas, we need you, all right? So you want to go to medical school, all right? You go to medical school, we're going to forgive all of your student debt. And by the way, 4 years ago when I came to the state, and I want to thank the people of Iowa for the strong support they gave me, and it's not just a personal issue that I'm thanking them for. The ideas that I brought to Iowa, which a lot of the establishment thought were crazy and radical, maybe some in the Des Moines Register, turned out not to be so crazy and radical. So the idea of making public colleges and universities tuition-free, that's an idea spreading all over the country. New Mexico, for example, has adopted that. New York State, California, people are moving in that direction. So, we're going to continue the struggle to make sure that healthcare is a human right for all people. Question, follow-up, or?
No, I'll transition. What's your relationship, I'm just going to throw this in, with Charles Grassley and Joni Ernst?
I know them both. I like them both. Chuck and I often ride the tram to voting together, and I like Joni as well. But where I am disappointed on them, and maybe we'll talk about climate change, is in this day and age, we cannot have members of the United States Senate denying the reality and the severity of the climate change crisis. It's going to hit Iowa in terms of your agriculture, in terms of the great cost that the floods are going to result in for communities all over the state. It's too late for people to say, well, we're not sure. We are sure. And we've got to listen to the scientists. And I just want to say, I hope we'll discuss climate change in a minute. But if there is anything we have got to understand, is that the scientists have recently told us that they underestimated the severity and the extent to which climate change is ravaging our country and the entire world. This is an existential crisis. And if we don't get our act together and move aggressively, extremely aggressively, in terms of climate change, then the planet we are leaving our children and future generations will be significantly uninhabitable and unhealthy. And we cannot allow that to happen. This is an issue I feel very, very strongly about. And when I'm looking at the fossil fuel industry today, I'm thinking back to the tobacco industry. And I'm thinking back, some of you remember that famous picture of the tobacco executives raising their arms. Members of Congress said, do you believe that tobacco is causing health habits, that it's addictive? Oh, no, we have no evidence to believe that. They lied. They had the evidence. My father smoked 2 packs a day. He died at the age of 58. Okay? It's a true story for, we gave cigarettes out to soldiers in World War II. Okay? They lied about the incredible health impact of tobacco. Right now, the fossil fuel industry is lying when they deny the reality of climate change or the severity of climate change. And as president, I will deal with that.
So whether you agree or disagree on the cause of climate change.
Is there any disagreement?
Well,
let me stop you. Let me stop you right there. I'll answer your question, I promise. All right? We're beyond that. Okay? 5 years ago, the fossil fuel industry put a lot of money into these think tanks, and they had these scientists on their payroll saying, well, we're not sure about the evidence, there's natural warming and all that other stuff. The scientific, look, I am not a scientist. I failed physics in college, but I do read science, okay? There's no debate anymore, and let's end that nonsense about there being debate. Climate change is real. Climate change is caused by human activity. Climate change is doing devastating harm. Climate change will ravage this planet, Iowa, Vermont, the whole country, unless we get our act together.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt you.
So my question is this. There are those out there who deny the human
Yes.
factor in it.
Including
It's
the
hard-
President of the United States.
Exactly. So it's hard to, but it is hard to ignore or deny the reality. I mean, in Iowa, farmers, as you point out, are dealing with wetter fields than ever,
That's right.
all the time, et cetera. Coastal cities are going to deal with flooding. So, I mean, at some point, the debate, doesn't it have to move off of whose fault it is? We got to deal with it, because even if we do have a Green New Deal, it's going to take decades to get it in action. Then in the meantime, it's got a lot of environmental impact.
I agree with everything you said, that people, even those who are denying the reality, if you're a farmer and you don't think climate change is real and you can't plant your crops because your fields are covered with mud,
Right.
You're understanding something is going on. If you got drought, which is going to cut back on the quality of the product that you're producing. Where I disagree with you is we don't have decades. We don't have decades. And I don't want to frighten anybody, and I'm not here to tell you that this is my research. It's not. I'm listening to what the scientists are telling us. We do not have decades. If you're talking about decades, then you're really dooming your kids and your grandchildren to an increasingly unhealthy life. Not only in this country. You're talking about coastal communities, not just Miami, not just Charleston, not just even New York City. You're talking about Bangladesh, you're talking about Vietnam, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of people being displaced from where they are living, with all of the cataclysmic global problems that causes in terms of mass migrations. So this is what we got to do, and we have to understand this. I mean, if I told you that there was some country declared war on the United States of America, was attacking us, you would not say, well, we got decades to deal with it. You don't have decades. We have got to deal with it now, and we have to deal with it in a very dramatic and aggressive way. And that's what I am very proud to say, that the proposal that I've introduced is the most comprehensive proposal out there to address climate change. And it can't be decades. We've got to move a lot quicker than that, not only in America, but around the world.
Your plan, one of the things it says is to enlist farmers, like those in Iowa, with carbon sequestration and being part of the solution.
Yes.
Yet, very simple things in past farm bills, like more money for conservation, say, haven't been able to get passed. So how do we get over the hump to start movement on this?
You're asking a question not only about agriculture, not only about climate change, you're really asking a question about political corruption. Because if you go out to the country today and you say, should we invest more money in conservation? Should we make it easier for farmers to be part of the solution in terms of climate change? 90% of the people say, of course we should. What's the problem? But the problem in Washington right now, and I know I won't surprise too many people in saying it, is that we have a corrupt political system in which Congress, especially my Republican colleagues, are interested in doing the bidding of the wealthy and the powerful and campaign contributors rather than responding to the needs of ordinary Americans, whether it is farmers or workers. So to answer your question, the subtitle of my campaign, as you know, is called A Political Revolution. And I use those words advisedly. And I know that gets some people nervous. But essentially what I believe is that in this particular moment in history, when we have massive levels of income and wealth inequality, 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of America, when you got a corrupt political system which allows billionaires to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to buy candidates who represent the wealthy and the powerful, we need, whether it is agriculture, protecting family farmers, or anything else, we need a mass movement of working people to stand up and take on the 1% and the corporate elite. And that is what our campaign is about.
You use the term corrupt in a TV ad that's running in Iowa now. You call President Trump the most corrupt president in American history, and it shows the president shaking Vladimir Putin's hand. Given that, can you honestly approach an impeachment trial with an open mind?
Fair question. And I will do my best. What I will tell you I mean, the question you're asking me is a reasonable question. I'm going to be a juror. Have I already decided that he's guilty? What my promise is, and I think my obligation as a United States Senator, who will, if he is impeached, be a juror, is to listen to all of the evidence. So you can dislike Trump. You can disagree with Trump. You can think Trump is a terrible, terrible president. Does that mean that his crime, what he did, is impeachable? Not necessarily. No, it does not. So I've got to listen to the evidence. I will certainly be hearing what Trump's defenders have to say. But this is what I will tell you, is if I were in the House, based on what I have heard and seen so far, I would vote to impeach Trump. I think he has obstructed justice in terms of the Mueller investigation. I think he is likely guilty of the emoluments clause, which prohibits a president from earning money, from making money through his position as president. I think he has used his position as president to make many millions of dollars. And lastly, I think in terms of the Ukraine, if you are doing a quid pro quo in terms of providing hundreds of millions of dollars of military aid to an ally in exchange for dirt on a political opponent, that's an impeachable offense as well. So I will, if I were in the House, based on what I know, I would vote to impeach. I'm a United States Senator. If it comes to the Senate, I will listen to all of the evidence and make a decision based on that.
I wanted to circle back to student loan debt because it's something that you've talked about a lot.
Yes.
How do you talk with people who didn't get to go to college and say that it's fair to cancel the debt for all those people who got that privilege?
What I say is that working people cannot allow themselves to be divided up. I believe that in a highly competitive global economy, that we have to rethink what free public education means. Iowa has been one of the leaders historically in public education. And the fights that people in Iowa made 100 plus years ago in saying, you know what, all kids, regardless of their income, have a right to go to high school, get a high school degree, and it should be free, it should be paid for out of public taxes. That was a huge breakthrough for the working class of this country, so that it would not only be rich people being able to send their kids to college. The time is now to re-examine that concept, and I believe that in this day and age, with the explosion of technology and a global economy, if we want our kids to go out and get the good jobs that are there, they're going to need a higher education. That does not just mean college, by the way. It means trade school. You want to be a sheet metal worker. You want to be a carpenter. You want to be a plumber. You need additional training. And I think we should make public colleges and universities tuition free. We should substantially increase Pell Grants and work-study programs. So bottom line is anybody in America who wants a higher education should be able to do that. Now, in terms of student debt, you got some 45 million Americans today are dealing with student debt. I have talked to young people who have been paying off that debt for decades. They can't get married and have kids. They can't buy a house. They can't buy a car. That generation often will have a lower real wages than their parents. And I think it is appropriate to say to that generation, both for them and for the economy, that we are going to cancel those student debts. Now, how do we do that? Do we put the burden on the average working person? No, we don't. We are saying that at a time when we bailed out the crooks on Wall Street, whose greed and illegal behavior nearly destroyed our economy back in 2008, we bailed them out. And we bailed them out not only through a TARP grant of $700 billion, but through zero interest loans. Trillions of dollars of zero interest loans, which is real money. And I think if we can bail the crooks out on Wall Street, if we can give $1 trillion in tax breaks to the 1% in private corporations, which is what Trump did, you know what? We can cancel all student debt
But that
in this
wasn't
country.
done because it was the right thing to do. It was done because we were facing what we thought was an economic apocalypse.
Well, without going into...
It's not comparable to
Well,
college.
if you are that young person who graduated dental school, who I talked to in Des Moines, young woman, $400,000 in debt, maybe it's an apocalypse for her. But I think punishing, I mean, philosophically, well, let me back it up a little bit, and to say that 50 years ago, 60 years ago, Do you know how much it costs to go to some of the great public universities in America? Do you recall that? The University of California, University City of New York. I wouldn't be surprised the universities here in Iowa. Virtually tuition free. Am I right on that or wrong?
No, going back to your statement about Iowa public education, another thing that Iowa leads in is private colleges. What does free tuition at public universities do to those
I'll tell you what it does.
schools?
What it does is part of our educational, the only point that I wanted to make is that what I'm proposing for public colleges and universities, not such a radical idea because we virtually had it 50 or 60 years ago. So how come right now when we're wealthier, our young people are finding it harder to go to college? Second of all, in terms of your question, what we also do is not only make public colleges and universities tuition free, we greatly expand Pell Grants and work-study programs so that if somebody who has every right in the world wants to go to a private college, they will be able to do that as well. We make it far easier. The goal is to have anybody in this country who wants a higher education, again, not just college, but trade school, be able to get that education and leave school without debt. I don't think that that's a radical idea. I think that's exactly what should be
Why not
happening.
index it though, so that if you have, if you're that dentist who's going to be making a $200,000 income, you'd still have to pay off some of that
Well, I'll
debt.
tell you why. I understand that one of my opponents has raised that issue. I guess he has a TV ad running here in Iowa. And the answer is twofold. I am glad that he is very worried that I have been too kind to the wealthy. Maybe I'll get him to do an ad for me here on that. The answer is that I believe in universal programs like Social Security, like Medicare. One of the concerns when you go around the country and you talk to people and they say, everything is so bloody complicated. Okay, so I'm on Medicaid and I got a good job. I lost my Medicaid. My income went up by $500. I'm off of a program. I got to fill out 18 forms to get onto the program, all right? So what I believe is we have certain principles. Social Security is a universal program. Bill Gates gets his $15,000, $20,000 a year Social Security check. I'm sure it means a great deal to him, worth $50 billion, but he pays into it. So what I believe right now, you got the richest people in the state of Iowa, state of Vermont. They choose to send their kids to public elementary schools or high schools. Their kids go like everybody else goes. And it's a good thing, by the way. All right. So I think what we have got to do is have universal programs, public colleges and universities tuition free. Healthcare is a human right for all people, but we fund it in a progressive way so that the wealthiest people in this country, believe me, who are not, unlike Mr. Buttigieg and others, I do not get a whole lot of campaign funding from millionaires and billionaires and the CEOs of large corporations, because they know we have tax policies which are going to demand that they start paying their fair share of taxes. So we're going to raise the necessary funds that we need in terms of making public colleges and universities tuition free. That is, over a 10-year period, about a $1.4 trillion program. We're going to raise $1.6 trillion through a modest tax on Wall Street speculation. Wall Street doesn't like it. I think it's a good idea. So I believe in universal programs. I believe you fund them by progressive taxation on the wealthy. I think the programs are open to everybody. That is easier. That is cleaner. You don't have middle-class families who got a pay raise, lose their eligibility, or have to fill out 100 different forms.
If you become president, what are some of your first executive orders? And I'm thinking specifically of DACA or
Good.
things related. So what would you do?
It's going to be a very busy first day. I've made enough promises to keep me going for 24 hours. I'll be a sleepy, very sleepy president on the second day, I'll tell you that. In terms of DACA, and in terms of immigration, we will undo all of the racist executive orders that Trump has put into place. He could do it through executive orders. I can undo them through executive orders. And certainly at the top of the list is restoring the legal status of the 1.8 million young people and their parents in the DACA program. That's what we do. We end this Mexico City agreement situation, which denies the ability of the United States to fund organizations around the world who believe in reproductive rights or the rights of women to control their own bodies. We are going to, in terms of immigration, move on the first day to end private prisons and detention centers in this country. I don't think corporations should be making money locking people up. The other thing that we do by executive order is to tell those corporations that have government contracts that the minimum wage they will pay their workers will be $15 an hour. I worked hard under Obama to raise that to $10.10 an hour, which is where it is. It used to be the national minimum wage. It got up to $10.10. If you want a contract with the federal government, you pay your workers at least $15 an hour. Those are some of what we do on day one.
So in terms of those, Trump has been criticized for his executive orders for all sorts of reasons, but some of the criticism was he didn't have a plan when he was issuing these broad policy statements. You know, remember when people were protesting at the airports and
Right.
the INS agents didn't know what to do,
Right,
how to
right,
handle this.
right.
So how would you get all that done without having a staff and administration on your very first day to immediately make what would be major changes?
You have an interval between Election Day and the day you're inaugurated. And during that time, the federal employees and agencies will know exactly what we have in mind. No great secret. I've been campaigning on them. And you're right. I mean, one of the many, many criticisms that is made of Donald Trump is he develops policy at 3 o'clock in the morning through a tweet. That is not the way you do policy. And also, I should tell you that much of what I want to do is not going to be done by executive order. The president, Mr. Trump doesn't understand that, but presidents are not dictators. They're not kings. We have a legislative process in this country. And for many of the things that I want to happen, it's going to have to go to the Congress, and I'm going to have to fight for it. But there are things you can do with executive orders, and the people of America will know exactly what they are.
Are there things Trump has done you agree with, or can we think of anything?
Look, I'm sure if I thought very hard, we were here for a few hours, I could, but I have to say this. My disagreement with Trump is not just that he's a pathological liar, that he came to the people of Iowa and he said, you know, I'm a different type of Republican, you know that. I'm not going to cut Medicare, I'm not going to cut Medicaid, I'm not going to cut Social Security. Well, look at his budget. He does exactly that, massive cuts to Medicaid and Medicare, cuts to Social Security. It's not just that he said his tax plan would benefit the working class of this country when 83% of the benefits are going to the top 1%. But I'll tell you, you asked me about Trump. What viscerally I dislike the most is not just his policies, tax breaks for the rich, cuts to Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, horrific, ignorant, dangerous position on climate change. It goes deeper than that. You have presidents who I disagree with all the time, like George W. Bush, all right? Conservative Republican. I disagree with Bush on everything. But Bush did not go out of his way to divide the American people up based on the color of our skin, based on where we were born, based on our religion, based on our sexual orientation. He did not do that, right? And one assumes that any president of the United States, you're conservative, you're moderate, you're progressive, understands that your function as president of the United States is to bring people together. Who cares what your religion is? Who cares what the color of your skin is? Who cares what your sexual orientation is? We're Americans. And to be fostering hatred based on where somebody was born, that is unacceptable. So, you know, when you have a president who is doing that, who is a racist and a sexist and a homophobe and a xenophobe and a religious bigot, you're asking me what do I like about what Trump has done? I really can't answer that, which is not to say. You know,
I was thinking of a policy.
yeah, I know.
Stocks, I don't know.
You know, he talks. I mean, early on in his administration, apparently not so much anymore. And, you know, by the way, even with Trump, I'm asked every day by the media, what do you think about what Trump said yesterday? And I said, wait till tomorrow. Because what he said yesterday will no longer be relevant tomorrow. Maybe he changes his mind. But, you know, certainly he talked about the high cost of prescription drugs, campaigned on that. Well, he's right, as I've indicated. Is he going to do anything meaningful? I doubt it. He talked about rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, right? He's right. Our infrastructure, whether it's our water systems, roads, bridges, Iowa, serious problem, Vermont, serious problem. Has he done anything? No, he's doing the bidding of Wall Street in terms of infrastructure. So,
Well, is there anything in his is an attitude toward China that makes sense. Whether you like his tariffs or not, but at least he's dealing with some behavior of the Chinese government.
really.
What have you.
Well, that's news.
That's what's driving him.
No, I don't. In all due respect, I don't
Okay,
agree.
but is there anything?
What's
that-
driving Trump, I believe, and again, I'm not happy to have to tell you this. I would not say this. I have friends who are conservatives, all right? I really do. And I respect, we argue with each other, but what drives Trump is personal gain. What drives Trump is power and his desire to be reelected. So he will do anything, and I worry very much, sorry, an aside here, that in this campaign that you may see in an unprecedented way the merger of government agencies with his campaign. Because I think he does not understand the rule of law. I do not believe he does, or what the Constitution is about. But to answer your question, you have a president of the United States who, in terms of foreign policy, has turned his back on what has been our global legacy for so many decades, that the United States was a country of hope and optimism for billions of people around the world who looked at us as the defenders of democracy and human rights. All right? That has gone on for so many years. Have we been perfect about it? Obviously not. But that's what we said. We believe in democracy. We believe in human rights. And you have a president who not only seems to have a good buddy in Putin, who's an autocrat, or in Mohammed bin Salman, who is a murderer, or in Duarte, who is the head of the Philippines, who is complete attacks on human rights there. Bolsonaro, he has aligned himself with the worst anti-human rights leaders around the world. And in China, his policies have been ambivalent. Not so many months ago, years ago, Xi was a good friend of his, right? Thought he was doing a great job. Kim Jong-un, good buddy of his, who was an incredible tyrant. So I have, doubts about his motives in terms of China. What we should be doing with China is understanding they are a superpower. They are a strong economy. We want to be working with them. We certainly don't want a Cold War. But we should be speaking out against human rights abuses. When you put into concentration camps, or at least lock up, 1 million Muslims there, somebody's got to speak out about that.
Can you talk a little bit about food assistance, which is important to Iowa, not just for low-income people, but our ag economy, and there's been some policy changes this week related to work requirements around food assistance. What are your thoughts?
This is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. We should not have millions of people who are living in food insecurity. We give tax breaks to billionaires and large profitable corporations, and you have kids who are going to school who are hungry. So it seems to me that a very, I think, not debatable situation is that nobody in America should go hungry. And what Trump's policies now are punishing poor people, increasing hunger in America. By the way, just if I might, I know I'm doing a few asides here, you'll forgive me, but I'm answering any questions you have. I was in Des Moines. I think it was 4 years ago, I guess I was running the first time. And I was at the farmer's market. You have a beautiful farmer's market on Saturday morning, right? And I was there, and I talked to a guy, bumped into a guy, and we chatted for a while, and I said, what do you do? He said, he works for a church, and what he does at the farmer's market, he collects the food that is not sold, and he brings it to an emergency food shelf. And I asked him, I'm kind of curious, who is going to the food shelf? Who goes? Is this just people unemployed, people with disabilities, really poor people? He said, no. Most of the people who go are working people who are not earning enough money to take care of their families. So to cut back on food stamps, this is what demagogues do. You give tax breaks to billionaires. You give hundreds of billions of dollars in tax breaks and subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. You expand military spending so that we're now spending more than the next 10 nations combined. And then to show how tough you are, you cut back on the poorest people in this country and create a situation where folks are going to go hungry.
Can you talk a little bit about your health? I think it's something people are wondering about, and give us an update on that.
Sure. As I suspect all of you know, I underwent a procedure which required 2 stents. I know more about cardiology now than I ever hoped to know. I was in the hospital for 2.5 days. It is a procedure which is done about 1 million times a year in the United States. Not a very unusual procedure. I had a blocked artery. That artery is now doing quite well. And in fact, in many respects, I am feeling better than I did before the heart attack. Because I got 3 arteries that are working, and I have less, and I kick myself. I've said this before, and if you want any free advice here, is listen to your body. I worked very hard and campaigned very hard, but I was finding myself getting more fatigued than I usually did. I usually am able to go out and walk for 1.5 hours, and I wasn't. I was walking for 45 minutes and getting tired, and I should have asked myself why. But anyhow, right now, I am feeling fine. We're running my staff has lined me up from morning to night today. I probably have 6 different events. And I am feeling fine. And obviously, I understand that people are concerned. I would not be running for president today if I did not feel that I could be will be a very strong and hardworking president, understanding, the stress and the difficulties of anybody who's president of the United States.
Were you scared?
Tell you what, here's what it was. I don't know if this is wood or not. I'm knocking on whatever it is. All right. I was blessed with really good health. When I was a kid, I used to run forever. I was one of the better long-distance runners in New York City, and I was a cross-country captain and won real out races. And I've had enormous endurance my whole life. I never had to worry about my body. What literally shocked me, it wasn't, the pain was distressing. It wasn't terrible pain. I didn't collapse or anything. It was for the first time in my life, the doctor said, you're having a heart attack. I couldn't believe it. I just could not believe it. That was the thing. But again, I'm feeling strong right now. I am in good health, working hard, and look forward to becoming president of the United States.
Would you consider limiting yourself to 1 term to sort of blunt that age issue?
I don't think that any candidate should do that for a couple of reasons. You don't know. I mean, what happens at the end of 4 years? I have a really successful administration. I'm feeling great. People say, Bernie, we want to support you for another term. And I say, oh, no, I promise not to do that. And second of all, and one of my staff members made this point, if you do that, you're going in as a lame duck president, aren't you? And there's a disadvantage to that. So, you play it out, if at the end of 4 years, I and the American people think I'm not doing well, I wouldn't run. If I'm doing well, I likely would run. But I think it's premature to be talking about that now.
One of the jobs that you would have as president is to appoint judges both to the U.S. Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals, but to the district courts all over the country. How would you approach that job?
Unlike the current president, I would appoint judges who are qualified, who the Bar Association thinks are qualified. It is an outrage that we are seeing judges appointed today who have minimal qualifications other than their adherence to Trump's ideology. But I want to say this. I believe very strongly that it is women who have the right to control their own bodies, not local, state, or federal politicians. And one promise I have made, and I repeat to you, I will not ever nominate a candidate to the Supreme Court who is not 100% pro Roe v. Wade. That's a promise. So that's my litmus test. But also, I wish I could tell you what you wouldn't believe it if I told you, but Chief Justice Roberts may tell you that when we in the Supreme Court, politics doesn't matter. We're all Americans. We all look at the Constitution and we reach our conclusions independently and objectively. I wish I could tell you that's the truth. It is not. Supreme Court today is a very political institution. Trump's nominees, by and large, come from the Federalist Society, which is a right-wing extremist organization, to my mind. And I will be nominating people to the Supreme Court and to other court positions who not only understand that a woman has the right to control her own body, but also understand what is happening to working families in this country and are not going to be beholden to powerful corporate interests. That's my answer.
So isn't the use of a litmus test, whether it's for Roe v. Wade or Brown versus Board of Education or choose whatever your favorite ruling is, aren't those litmus tests what get us a court, that's a political institution as opposed to judges who use their own instincts?
That's a fair question. And I wish I could tell you that in the best of all possible worlds, all I have, and by the way, this president is not even appointing qualified people. But I wish I could tell you that in the best of all possible worlds, if you are qualified, if you have a strong record on the job, that I'm going to appoint you. This is not the best of all possible worlds. And obviously, I want judges who will be intelligent, who understand the Constitution, who are objective. But I have said, and I repeat to you, that in terms of a woman's right to control her own body, that is a litmus test for me.
In terms of litmus tests during the sit-down,
Whoops, excuse me, in terms of a litmus test, I just knocked off the microphone.
we should hear your answer to my question. I will ask while you get yourself rehooked up.
Okay.
You've railed against the pharmaceutical industry, fossil fuels, Wall Street, and previously many other industries. If somebody applying to be a judge or a justice had represented any of those industries, could you imagine yourself appointing them?
Well, representative, I got it. I think I have it. A representative is a broad word. If somebody has spent his or her life representing powerful corporate interests against the needs of working family, probably that person will not be very high on my list. Last night, I had a very nice meeting talking to the Iowa Organic Farmers Association. The point that I made, whether it's agriculture or any place else, we have an administration that is beholden to, in this case, agribusiness and powerful corporate interest in agriculture, ignoring the needs of family farmers. I want judges who live in the real world, who understand that half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. And when they rule against unions, they are making decisions that will lower the standard of living of working people. When they rule that it's okay for corporations to pollute the environment, that they are causing illness and maybe death for people. So I think it is important to take a look at the background of the person. Does that mean that sometimes 20 years ago somebody worked for a company? No. You look at the totality of that person's experience.
To stick with judges, you mentioned that you think the President Trump's appointees are unqualified, and they're looking at lifetime appointments nonetheless. What will you do about these judges?
Well, I think there is a constitutional argument to be made. Some constitutional scholars, I'm not a lawyer, but some have said that what we do when we appoint judges, they have a lifetime appointment, but not necessarily to the Supreme Court. So it is possible to rotate judges in district courts into the Supreme Court. And that's something that I will take a look at.
You mentioned earlier that you voted against the Iraq War. You often point that out. You want troops out of Afghanistan. In general, you take a very cautious approach as far as committing troops.
Yes.
Could you outline in more detail, other than an outright attack on the homeland, what criteria would you use in saying, yes, this is worth committing troops?
I'm not a pacifist. But I think our history is that it just, and I say this as a United States Senator, somebody who's in the Congress, it's very easy for a politician to give a really tough speech. And the only thing that X country respects is force. How often have we heard that in our lifetimes? And therefore, we're going to go to war. Take a look at what happened in Vietnam. It was a young man marching in the streets against the war in Vietnam. History indicated that those who advocated that war were terribly, terribly wrong. And a whole generation, my generation, the young men who came home for that war, so many died in Vietnam, somebody came home and died here, some of them are on the streets today. War is a terrible, terrible thing. And I know that from a political point of view, it looks wimpy to be in favor of diplomacy. Hey, get tough with that country. But often the politicians who are sending our young working class kids into war, it's not their kids who are going to war. Donald Trump didn't go to war. So I think that force is the last response. Sometimes it may be necessary. If you're in a genocidal situation, where millions of people or large numbers of people might be killed without international response. And by the way, I think it should not be just the United States responding. I believe in strengthening the United Nations, not weakening it. So I would like to see, when necessary, when force is applicable, to see the countries around the world coming together on that response. But if I think back on my own lifetime, your lifetime, I think about Vietnam, I think about the war in Iraq. Those were terrible, terrible mistakes. And it wasn't the politicians who paid the price. It was working class kids and people all over the world who were impacted by those wars. God knows how many hundreds of thousands, or even millions of people died as a result of the Iraq war. So we have got to be very, very cautious. Trump is cutting back on aid to the, cutting back on aid to the State Department. We have, maybe you could do a better job. Commercial break. Be back in a minute.
Technical difficulties.
All right. So,
Got a limited runway.
okay, I'm not going anywhere. All right. So Trump is cutting back on support for the State Department, our own state. I've been all over the world, as a congressman and senator. Made many trips with Tom Hawken, by the way. And you're impressed by the quality of people who you see in embassies all over the world. Serious people who know the language, who know the culture, who are representing the United States in very positive ways. To cut back on those people while we greatly, greatly expand military spending, to lay the groundwork for war, no, that's very much the opposite of what I believe. So you cannot predict what happens tomorrow or 10 years from now. But I believe in diplomacy. I'll tell you what else I believe in. I believe in exchange programs. I believe that wars often evolve when people are frightened about somebody else because they don't know anything about them. It's very easy to demonize somebody else. Different person of different language, different color, different culture. When I was mayor of the city of Burlington, I started two sister city programs, one in the former Soviet Union and one in Nicaragua. And I think both of them are still around today. It was beautiful to see kids. I'll never forget seeing kids from what was then the Soviet Union coming here, talking, be involved with kids from Burlington, Vermont. We need to make the world a little bit smaller place and make sure that we know each other before we go around killing each other.
Both you and Senator Warren advocate a wealth tax. Hers is kind of a flat 2 cents on wealth over 50 million. Yours is a little more complicated. It starts at 1 and then goes up. Why is yours better?
Here's what I think. And again, this is an issue I am proud to have maybe helped bring to the forefront as a nation. And that is, we have more income and wealth inequality today in America than almost any other major country on earth, and it is worse now than it was in 1920. So this is the question we have to ask ourselves. Tonight, you're going to have 500,000 people sleeping out on the street, including some 30,000 veterans. 87 million people are either uninsured or underinsured. Hundreds of thousands of kids can't afford to go to college. Many are leaving school deeply in debt. 18 million people are spending half of their income on housing, et cetera, et cetera. Half our population is living paycheck to paycheck. Can we continue in good faith maintaining a nation in which so few have so much and so many have so little? Over the last 30 years, I know I'm sorry to bore you with statistics, but that's the case. Over the last 30 years, the top 1% has seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth. $21 trillion for the top 1%. bottom half of American society has seen a decline in their wealth. So I'm here to tell you, I know not everybody will agree with me, I think that is fundamentally wrong. It is a threat to our way of life as a nation, it is a threat to democracy, and we are moving in the direction of oligarchy, where a handful of billionaires control our economic and political life. So, I believe it is time to take the billionaire class on. I know that they are not happy about it. I guess some of them are actually on tears, believing that somebody thinks that when we have kids in America going hungry, that they are entitled to maintain 30, 50, what is Bezos worth, $150 billion? No, I'm sorry, I don't believe that at all. So we are going to levy very heavy taxes on wealth and on income. These guys will be fine. Believe me, they're going to get by on their $5 or $10 billion a year. We're not pushing them out onto the streets. Their families will be fine. But I got to say this also, and I apologize. You get me going on things, and I know I extrapolated. We have a major crisis in this country in terms of lowering of life expectancy. You're all aware of that. And the doctors call that diseases of despair, which are largely drug addiction, alcoholism, suicide. I believe that the kind of greed that we are seeing among the richest people in this country is an addiction. Now, I grew up in a working class family. I lived in a rent-controlled apartment my whole life. My family never had any money. So I got to tell you, I'm not familiar with living in a billionaire home. But I don't understand. I really do not understand that if you are worth $10 billion, why you think you need to step on working people, why you need to take factories in this country that are making money, send them to China or to Mexico, why you need to come down to Congress. I've dealt with these people. Oh yes, we are billionaires, but we think you should cut Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid because we're worried about the national debt, all right? So the answer is, I think the time is now to tell the billionaire class that they really cannot have it all, that their greed is destroying this country. And by the way, not only greed, the corruption that goes with the greed. And I will deal with that.
So why do you think this income inequality happened in this country? And is taxing the 1% the answer to cure it?
No, it's
not
the answer. It's not the answer, but it is part of the answer.
Right. So what happened?
Well, people write big books on this. I don't have all the answers. I'll tell you what I think happened. I think that after Lyndon Johnson won his landslide victory when he won that in '64, fighting for Medicare, fighting for Medicaid, fighting for a host of programs that benefited working people. And by the way, I think with the exception of the terrible Vietnam War, Lyndon Johnson is an underestimated president, in my view. I think the ruling class of this country woke up and they said, oh my God, if this continues, if government starts responding to the needs of working families, we're going to be in big trouble. And they mounted a massive multi-front operation. I mean, it is very well constructed. This is people like later on the Koch brothers and everybody else. This is funding think tanks. This is in a coordinated way funding politicians. This is funding through the ALEC program lobbyists at state legislatures. This is doing lobbying in a way that we've never seen before. We started this discussion with the pharmaceutical industry. Over the last 20 years, the pharmaceutical industry has spent $4 billion in lobbying and campaign contributions. And they're not radically different than the fossil fuel industry, than Wall Street insurance companies. So I think what they sat around and said, look, if you have a government that represents working families, if we raise wages, if we, the rich, are asked to pay our fair share of taxes, if we cannot continue to run industries which pollute, we're in trouble. And we got to fight back. And they fought back in what has to be acknowledged a very coordinated and intelligent way. They brought some really smart people on board. So it has to do with developing trade policies. You asked the reason why? It has to do with developing trade policies that cost working families in this country millions of good-paying jobs. It has to do with a very coordinated attack on trade unions in America. Right now, you got millions of people who want to join unions, can't do it, often because of illegal behavior on the part of their employers in corporations. It has to do with tax policy. You know, you're asking, gee, do you really want to ask the rich and the powerful to pay their fair share of taxes? What about asking Donald Trump and his friends why they gave $8 trillion in tax breaks over 10 years to the 1% in large profitable corporations? Why are we not discussing why Amazon, a corporation that made over $10 billion in profit last year, owned by the wealthiest guy in America, didn't pay a nickel in federal income tax? What about a system which allows the rich and corporations to slash, God knows, we don't know, hundreds of billions, trillions of dollars in the Cayman Islands and other tax havens to avoid taxes? So my answer to your question, I mean, people write books on this, is there has been a very coordinated effort on the part of the ruling class of this country, the billionaire class, to do everything they can to increase their own wealth, and they have been enormously successful. $21 trillion increase in wealth over the last 20 years is quite something. And they have been, you asked me a moment ago about cutting food stamps. This is what it's about. Tax breaks for billionaires, rich get richer, and then we cut back on the needs of working class. How could it happen that in a state like Iowa, a beautiful, great state like Iowa, you have a $7.25 minimum wage? Anybody think that makes sense? You know, so you have powerful lobbyists, powerful effort to protect the interests of working families. And the political revolution that I am helping to lead with millions of other people is saying enough is enough about that. We cannot continue to have a handful of billionaires, a few hundred people, developing policy for our government which simply benefits the very rich and their greed.
Are 1 or 2 terms of a Sanders presidency going to change all of that?
No. But 1 or 2 terms will go a long way to transforming this country away from the greed and immorality that we're seeing right now. It's going to change our value system. In 1 or 2 terms of the Sanders administration, we're going to guarantee health care to all people as a human right. And I think sometimes we don't understand what that means. We don't understand what it means when somebody gets sick and can't afford to go to a doctor. We don't understand what it means if you get diagnosed with cancer and end up in the hospital and you have a bill for $100,000. What does it happen if you're a working class person? You're going to go bankrupt, or your credit score will be shot. What does it mean that we have people working at jobs by the millions today? Why are they working at their jobs? Do they love their jobs? Is that what they want to do? No. It's because they have decent health care. And they got a family that they got to take care of. What does it mean if you can suddenly go to any job you want and continue to have strong health care? It will be transformative in America, all right? In 1 or 2 terms of the Sanders administration, we will do everything we can to save this planet for your kids and your grandchildren by taking on the fossil fuel industry. We will raise the minimum wage. So the people in Iowa, if you're working $10 an hour under a Sanders administration, we will raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour, and we will accomplish that. House passed the bill that I introduced. Of course, Mitch McConnell hasn't taken it up, but I will pass that. So if you're working 40 hours a week, you're not living in poverty. You will be able to go to college regardless of your income, and we will cancel student debt. So I'm not going to tell you that at the end of 4 years or 8 years, we transform the world and make everybody happy. No, it's not what happens. But I think we will go a long way toward changing the value system of this country and to significantly improve the lives of working class people in America.
What will you prioritize if you come into office with a Republican Senate?
I've been asked that about 10 million times. All right, what are you going to do? What's the major priorities that you have? And here's what I want to say in response. I do politics. Some of you may agree with me, some of you may not. People in Iowa agree with me, they don't, some don't. My view of politics is different than what most politicians tell you, okay? So I'm not going here and say, well, it's healthcare is my priority, raising wages is my priority, climate change, infrastructure, saving family farms. This is what I believe, and I have some experience for this because I was mayor of a city and I helped do this to some degree. When you transform politics, what is in this country, what does it mean? When suddenly millions of people are involved in the political process in a way that we have never seen before, which is essentially what our campaign is about, bringing working people, bringing young people to stand up for their lives. When you understand that the history of America in terms of real change has never taken place from the top on down, it's always the bottom on up. Think about the labor movement, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement. environmental movement. Today, just a few hours ago, I talked to young people who are deeply concerned about climate change, high school kids, college kids. That's how change takes place when millions of people get involved. And when we win this election, we will be beholden to those people. I will not only be commander-in-chief of the military, I will be organizer-in-chief. We're going to rally the American people around an agenda that works for working people. So there's not one issue. I will do everything humanly possible to fulfill the agenda that I'm running on. And that is healthcare as a human right by passing Medicare for all, raising the minimum wage to a living wage, making it easier for workers to join unions, putting hundreds of billions of dollars to build the affordable housing that we need, and creating millions of jobs doing that, and helping to lead the world in terms of climate change. So to me, it's not either or. We're going to do it all. And we're going to do it all because the agenda that we have, not a radical agenda, it's an agenda that the American people support. But what is hard for people, and I talk to a lot of people, often in the media and elsewhere, who think about politics the way it usually is. How am I going to negotiate with Mitch McConnell? That's not the issue. And by the way, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that Mitch McConnell is not the Republican leader, that we have Democrats controlling the Senate. But at the end of the day, change only comes about when millions of people demand it. And when they demand it, we can move very aggressively on a wide front of issues to transform this country.
Well, that sounds like a closing argument, and we're past time. So thank you very much, Senator Sanders, and come back to DesMoinesRegister.com for all of the caucus coverage. Thank you.